Welcome to the Pharma Files, where medicine meets mystery. Hi, I'm Lance Simard,
Hi, I'm Justine Burke.
and today we have a really fascinating investigation for you. So I want you to just, picture a room for a second.
Okay.
You're sitting in this deeply comfortable chair, like the kind that reclines just enough so you feel, completely supported.
Right, totally relaxed.
Exactly. There's soft ambient light, maybe some of that calming instrumental music playing quietly in the background. It feels uh, entirely removed from that harsh fluorescent glare you get in a traditional hospital.
Yeah, the classic clinical vibe, it's the opposite of that.
It's the total opposite. And you are watching a practitioner draw blood from your arm, but it's not that bright, vibrant red blood you might expect.
No, because it's venous blood.
Right. It's dark, almost a sluggish, heavy maroon color, because it's thoroughly deoxygenated from, its long journey circulating through your body.
Yeah, it's just doing its job.
Exactly. So it flows slowly into this sealed, sterile plastic bag hanging right beside you. And then the practitioner introduces a gas into that bag, ozone.
And well, the transformation that follows is what basically anchors this entire massive industry.
It's practically instantaneous.
Yeah.
Right before your eyes, the second that gas hits the liquid, that dark, sluggish maroon just flashes into a vivid, brilliant arterial red.
Wow.
It suddenly looks revitalized, it looks activated, it looks alive.
Yeah, it looks healthy.
And then the practitioner opens the IV line, and that bright red, newly vibrant blood flows right back into your vein.
I mean, if you are sitting in that chair, especially if you're facing a terrifying diagnosis, you are watching what appears to be this undeniable, visible healing happening right in real time.
You can literally see the change.
Right. It's totally tactile. And
It-
as
uh,
that blood returns to your circulatory system, a lot of patients report this immediate visceral rush, like a really profound feeling of being deeply energized.
Like their brain fog just clears up. So imagine you are a desperate patient, someone who has maybe been told by conventional oncology that they've just exhausted every single protocol.
That there's just nothing more to be done.
Yeah. And then you see this visual spectacle. The logic they tell you at these clinics makes, perfect intuitive sense on the surface. They say cancer cells thrive in low oxygen environments.
Right.
And they point to the bag and say, look at your blood. We are flooding your body with supercharged oxygen. We're going to starve the tumor by completely changing its environment.
It's a very compelling pitch.
It really is.
Yeah.
And to completely seal the deal, they tell you this entire theory is based on a Nobel Prize-winning scientific discovery.
Wow.
I mean, it is an incredibly persuasive, almost bulletproof narrative for someone who is just looking for hope.
Which is exactly what makes the reality of this whole subject so heartbreaking and so vitally important for us to explore today.
Yeah, we really need to get into it.
Because that underlying appeal, that visible rush of oxygen, the Nobel Prize connection, all that cellular logic, it's actually built on a foundation of genuine, verifiable science.
But there's a catch, right?
A huge one. It is science that has been tragically, fundamentally misread and misapplied for literally an entire century.
Okay, so we have an absolutely massive stack of sources to go through today. We are pulling from primary historical patents from the Gilded Age, original 1905, investigative journalism exposes.
Oh, the muckrakers.
Oh, yeah, we'll get some. And we've got decades of FDA enforcement records, plus some incredibly dense contemporary biochemical papers on tumor metabolism.
We're covering a lot of ground.
We really are.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to trace this exact phenomena. We're going to explore the fascinating, sometimes tragic history of ozone therapy for cancer.
And figure out how a real, undeniably brilliant discovery got weaponized.
Exactly. Turned into one of the most enduring alternative medical treatments of the last 100 years. And to understand how we got to these modern clinics with the bubbling bags of blood, we actually have to go all the way back to the 1840s.
Right, to a laboratory in Switzerland.
Yeah, and the smell of electricity.
So we are traveling back to 1840. This is the laboratory of a German-Swiss chemist named Christian Friedrich Schonbein. He's working in Basel, and he's doing experiments with running electric currents through water.
Which was basically cutting-edge tech back then.
Oh, absolutely. This is the era of that foundational, almost raw chemical experimentation that really defined the 19th century. And during these really long electrical experiments, he starts noticing a very sharp, distinct odor in the room.
It's that exact smell you get right after a massive lightning storm, isn't it?
Yes.
That crisp, almost metallic, clean freshness in the air.
Precisely. Schoenbein recognizes that this isn't just some random environmental smell. He realizes he has actually synthesized an entirely new substance.
Oh, wow. So he's changing the air itself.
Yeah, the electrical current is physically altering the molecular structure of the oxygen in the room. The electricity forces oxygen atoms to bond in groups of three, which creates O3.
And he names it ozone.
Right. Which actually comes from the Greek word ozone, literally meaning to smell.
That makes a lot of sense. But the defining characteristic of O3 isn't actually its smell, is it?
No, not at all.
It's the fact that having three oxygen atoms forced together makes it an incredibly unstable molecule.
Highly unstable.
Like it is desperately seeking to shed that extra atom to get back to a stable state. And that extreme reactivity is what makes ozone just a ruthless, indiscriminate oxidant.
And we really need to be rigorously clear about what being a ruthless oxidant actually entails,
Yeah.
in a biological context.
Break that down for us.
So oxidation is a process where one molecule violently steals electrons from another. Because ozone is so highly unstable, it just aggressively tears electrons away from almost anything it touches.
Just ripping things apart.
Literally. When it comes into contact with the cellular membranes of bacteria or the protein coats of viruses, it initiates a process called lipid peroxidation. It literally rips their cell walls apart on a molecular level.
It destroys them on contact.
Instantly.
It acts as an absolute microscopic wrecking ball. And the early chemists, even decades before they could fully map out the exact electron-stealing pathways, they saw the macroscopic results.
Right, they could see it was working.
They realized they had discovered an unparalleled, hyper-efficient disinfectant. So by 1857, the famous engineer Werner von Siemens builds the first practical, reliable ozone generator.
And the purpose for that was totally legitimate.
Entirely legitimate, practical engineering for water purification. By 1893, you have massive municipal water treatment plants in the Netherlands using ozone gas to disinfect drinking water for whole cities.
And what's really fascinating here is that this specific application wasn't just some fleeting Victorian fad.
No, it stuck around.
It firmly remains legitimate, highly effective public health technology today. Over 3,000 municipalities worldwide still use ozone to treat their drinking water.
Because it works beautifully to neutralize pathogens and make water safe.
Exactly. But this exact moment of legitimate engineering success is where the historical narrative takes a massive, really consequential detour into human biology.
Because human beings absolutely love a good logical leap.
Oh, we really do.
The 19th century medical mindset looks at these massive water plants and goes, well, if this gas purifies dirty water so effectively, why wouldn't it purify dirty, diseased blood?
It's that direct comparison.
Right, like if it smells fresh and clean and it kills bacteria in a puddle, it must be inherently medicinal for the human body.
It is an understandable instinct, I guess, especially back then when they were desperate for treatments. But it is a profoundly dangerous biological conflation.
They were confusing environmental sterilization with internal medicine. And I am honestly struggling to understand how medical professionals back then made that jump without immediately seeing disastrous consequences. Think about it. Bleach kills bacteria on my kitchen counter with incredible efficiency.
Right, but you don't drink it.
Exactly. I don't pour myself a nice glass of bleach to cure a cold. I inherently understand that the environmental cleaner is going to do the exact same violent damage to my internal organs that it does to the salmonella on the cutting board.
Because chemicals don't have brains.
Right. You can't just assume a chemical wrecking ball has the cognitive ability to know the difference between a bad bacterial germ and a good necessary human cell.
And the really rigorous scientists of that era actually knew this. The empirical data was right there very early on.
Who was studying it?
Well, in 1874, a Scottish chemist named James Dewar started running formal experiments. He placed animals, frogs, birds, rabbits in these sealed chambers and exposed them to ozonized air.
And what happened?
The results were immediate and pretty grim. The frogs became severely lethargic. The birds were actively gasping for air. The rabbits experienced a terrifying rapid drop in their overall blood oxygen levels.
Wait, I want to make sure I'm grasping this correctly. They are breathing in a gas that is literally composed of extra oxygen.
Superoxygen. Yeah.
And their blood oxygen levels actually drop. How does that work mechanically?
Because, just like your bleach analogy, ozone's cell-destroying properties absolutely do not discriminate.
So it's attacking them.
Yes. When those animals inhaled the gas, it wasn't just neutralizing some hypothetical pathogens in their airways. It was ruthlessly oxidizing the delicate, unprotected epithelial tissues of their own lungs.
Oh, wow.
It was systematically destroying the highly sensitive cellular machinery required to transfer breathable oxygen from the lungs into the bloodstream. Dewar was raising massive empirical red flags here. This gas is highly toxic to living respiratory tissue.
Okay, wait, this brings up a massive point of confusion for me. If Dewar proved in 1874 that ozone aggressively destroys lung tissue, how on earth are modern clinics bubbling it directly into human blood today without the patients instantly going into catastrophic distress?
It's a great question.
I mean, why does the lung tissue melt, but the blood in the IV bag seemingly thrive?
That is the essential biochemical paradox of ozone therapy, and it completely comes down to the specific environment the gas is interacting with.
Okay, so the lungs versus the blood.
Right. When ozone hits the incredibly delicate, thin alveolar lining of the lungs, there is virtually no defense. The tissue takes the full brunt of the oxidative damage. But human blood is an entirely different biological environment.
How so?
Blood serum is packed with a massive arsenal of water-soluble antioxidants, things like uric acid, ascorbic acid, albumin, various proteins.
So the blood basically has a built-in defense system that the lungs completely lack.
Exactly. When you introduce ozone into a bag of blood, the ozone molecule itself actually disappears almost immediately. It is instantly neutralized by the blood's robust antioxidant buffering system.
It gets swallowed up.
Yeah. But in the process of neutralizing the ozone, the blood creates a cascade of what we call reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
And what do those do?
These secondary messengers are what actually trigger that immediate, vivid color change in the blood, turning it that bright red. So the blood doesn't melt like the lung tissue because it absorbs and translates the oxidative stress completely differently.
That makes incredible sense biochemically.
Mm-hmm.
But historically, back in the late 19th century, the broader medical community didn't understand all that nuance about antioxidant buffers, did they?
Not at all. They just saw the height.
The desire for a miracle cure was just completely overpowering the empirical evidence of harm that Dewar published. You have medical journals of the time publishing letters that essentially say, well, sure, the frogs are gasping and dying, but a lightning storm makes the air feel nice and bracing, so let's keep experimenting with it on people.
It's wild. And to make matters significantly worse, the whole movement gets hijacked.
Oh, by who?
By one of the most famous, brilliant, and deeply flawed inventors in human history. This is what truly propels this toxic gas out of fringe experimentation and into a massive commercial medical product.
We are, of course, talking about Nikola Tesla.
Yes, Tesla.
He always seems to show up in these historical investigations, either as the unparalleled visionary who saw the future or this cautionary tale of unchecked ambition. And here he's a fascinating, kind of tragic bit of both.
Absolutely.
So in 1896, Tesla officially patents the first portable ozone generator in the United States. And because he is Nikola Tesla, arguably the most famous technological wizard of the Gilded Age, anything he puts his name on instantly gains this impenetrable halo of absolute scientific legitimacy.
But we have to look at the incredibly specific historical and financial context of what was happening in Tesla's life right at this moment.
He was in trouble, wasn't he?
Huge trouble. By 1900, he officially forms the Tesla Ozone Company. He is suddenly selling these machines to general practitioners and naturopaths. He's selling bottles of ozonated olive oil topical gels.
Wait, why the sudden jarring pivot from theoretical physics and alternating current into medical supplies?
Because his massive, wildly ambitious wireless electricity project at Wardenclyffe had just catastrophically lost its primary funding.
From J.P. Morgan.
Yes, the incredibly powerful financier J.P. Morgan pulled the plug.
Oh, this is such an aggressively modern story.
Isn't it?
It's exactly like watching a brilliant, high-profile tech founder in Silicon Valley today. You know, their massive, world-changing, venture-backed startup suddenly collapses under its own weight. The VC money completely dries up. And the very next week, they pivot entirely to selling high-tech proprietary wellness supplements on the internet.
It is the exact same playbook. Tesla was absolutely dead broke and desperate for immediate cash flow.
Did he even believe in the medical stuff?
Well, we actually have the historical correspondence. He literally wrote letters to J.P. Morgan explicitly stating that he needed to put something commercial out into the market without delay to generate revenue.
Wow. Just to survive.
Yeah. The ozone generator was already patented, the machines were relatively cheap and simple for his workshops to build, and the medical market at the turn of the century was absolutely starving for technological miracles.
And the medical community bought into the Tesla mystique entirely.
Completely.
By the early 1900s, you could open a standard Sears Roebuck catalog and order a home ozone device to casually bubble the gas through eucalyptus oil in your own living room.
Like a toxic humidifier.
Exactly. Legitimate medical textbooks from 1902 were actively citing ozonated water as a viable, tested cure for anemia, diabetes, and even cancer.
It was everywhere.
The head of physiotherapeutics at Loyola University was writing extensive, formal medical manuals on using ozone for tuberculosis and syphilis. Tesla's name had singularly validated an entire pseudoscientific field.
And honestly, whether Tesla genuinely believed he was curing people or whether he was just cynically trying to stave off crushing bankruptcy is almost historically irrelevant at this point.
Right, because the damage was done.
Exactly. He built the bedrock of credibility that other, far less scrupulous people would ruthlessly exploit.
And no one exploited that newly minted credibility better, or I guess worse, depending on your ethics, than the massive corporate entity behind a product called Liquozone.
Oh, Liquozone. This is where the historical narrative violently shifts from a misguided scientific frontier into pure calculated fraud.
So in 1898, this highly ambitious Chicago entrepreneur named Douglas Smith aggressively buys up a tiny, struggling Canadian operation. They had been selling this niche product called Powley's liquefied ozone.
Patchy.
Right. Smith realizes the potential of the name, though. He completely rebrands it as simply Liquozone. And to drive the sales, he brings in a man named Claude Hopkins to run the entire advertising strategy.
And if you know anything about the history of mass marketing, Claude Hopkins is an absolute legend.
He essentially invented modern advertising copy.
He really did. Hopkins takes this obscure product and launches one of the most aggressive, saturating, and manipulative advertising campaigns in American history.
What kind of claims were they making?
The printed claims in newspapers across the country were staggering. They offered ironclad, money-back guarantees that Liquozone would universally kill any disease germ known to human science.
Any germ.
Any germ. They explicitly claimed it cured 37 different, completely unrelated medical conditions, ranging from mild dandruff all the way to terminal cancer.
That's wild.
And they utilized this overwhelming blizzard of pseudo-scientific testimonials. They would expertly excerpt highly specific quotes from actual reputable bacteriologists, but they intentionally, surgically cut out all the necessary disclaimers and warnings.
It was a terrifying masterclass in public manipulation.
It really was.
Which raises the ultimate question. What was actually in the physical bottle? Like, what were millions of Americans actually drinking when they bought this miracle liquefied ozone?
You're not going to believe it. It was almost entirely tap water mixed with a very weak, highly irritating solution of sulfuric and sulfurous acids.
Wait, what?
Yeah. There was absolutely no meaningful, measurable quantity of actual ozone in the liquid whatsoever.
So millions of desperate people were paying top dollar to voluntarily drink diluted battery acid.
Essentially, yes.
That is horrific.
And the true tragedy of the Liquozone saga is what happened when it was finally rigorously tested by actual scientists.
What did they find?
Independent researchers ran controlled laboratory tests on guinea pigs. They intentionally infected them with severe pathogens like anthrax and tuberculosis. And they found that Liquozone didn't just fail to cure them.
Oh, no.
The constant ingestion of the acid actually severely lowered the animal's natural baseline immune responses.
Meaning they got worse.
Yes. This caused the Liquozone-treated guinea pigs to die significantly faster than the control group that received absolutely no treatment at all.
So they were paying for a miracle cure that was actively, measurably accelerating the death of the patients. Wow. But this is the exact era of the muckrakers, right? The fierce investigative journalists who were completely fed up with the unregulated patent medicine industry actively poisoning the public.
Thank goodness for them.
Truly. In 1905, a journalist named Samuel Hopkins Adams publishes an absolute bombshell investigative expose in Collier's magazine. He dramatically titles the series The Great American Fraud.
A fitting title.
He relentlessly tears Liquozone apart. He names the executives, publishes the damning guinea pig mortality data, reveals these horrific hospital cases of severe gastric ulcers caused by drinking the acid every day.
Just completely exposes them.
And he completely, utterly destroys the company's reputation.
Yeah.
He was so incredibly thorough, and his evidence was so ironclad that the Liquozone company couldn't even successfully sue him or the magazine for libel.
And if we look at the bigger picture of American history here, Adams's relentless work on Liquozone and similar frauds was the direct, undeniable catalyst for the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906.
That was a huge deal.
It was a monumental watershed moment in public health. It established the vital regulatory precursor to what we now know as the FDA. It legally forced companies to actually list their physical ingredients on the label and heavily constrained their ability to make wildly lethal, unsubstantiated claims.
So Liquozone as an entity was completely dead.
Completely dead.
But wait. If Liquozone is dead, the precursor to the FDA is born, and the public is supposedly protected. Why doesn't the concept of ozone therapy just die right there in 1906?
Right. How does it survive?
How does it survive the next century?
Well, because the world was about to plunge into a catastrophic global conflict that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of medical science, we have to look at the outbreak of World War I in 1914.
Right. The trench warfare.
Exactly.
The conditions on the Western Front were unimaginably horrific. Soldiers were standing for weeks in freezing, contaminated mud.
And the sheer scale of severe bacterial infections, trench foot, and massive gangrenous wounds was just unlike anything the medical establishment had ever faced before.
They were totally overwhelmed.
Completely. The standard antiseptics of 1914 were completely failing to manage the volume and severity of the infections. So out of pure, unadulterated desperation, military doctors, including those in the U.S. Army Medical Department, began utilizing ozone gas.
As the topical treatment, right.
Yes, exactly, to disinfect these massive necrotic open wounds.
And because we established earlier that ozone is a ruthless, indiscriminate oxidant, it actually worked on the surface of the skin.
It did. It aggressively killed the bacteria festering in those open wounds.
Did it hurt the patients?
I mean, it absolutely caused oxidative damage to the healthy surrounding tissue as well. But when the immediate alternative is systemic gangrene, sepsis, and radical amputation.
You take the tissue damage.
Exactly. Ozone was viewed as a highly legitimate, incredibly valuable field tool.
I see the trajectory now. You have this entire massive generation of military doctors returning from the war who have seen ozone do something profoundly medically useful with their own two eyes.
They have intense, practical battlefield experience with it.
Right. But using a toxic gas to scorch bacteria out of an open leg wound is a completely different universe than claiming it cures systemic internal cancer.
It's a huge leap.
Where does the cancer connection come from?
The cancer connection comes from a man who provided the ultimate theoretical anchor for the entire movement. A few decades after the war, the ozone advocates found a bona fide genius and a Nobel Prize to legitimize their philosophy.
Who was it?
This brings us to the profound work of Otto Warburg.
Okay, to understand the sheer gravity of the scientific era that follows, we first have to understand the absolute intellectual weight of Otto Warburg.
He was a titan.
He wasn't just a prominent scientist. He was considered scientific royalty in Europe.
Yeah.
He held both a highly prestigious chemistry doctorate and a medical degree.
And his background was incredible.
He grew up in an environment where his family was routinely hosting Albert Einstein and Max Planck for casual dinners.
Just casual dinner conversation with Einstein.
Right. And his brilliance was widely recognized early on. During World War I, Warburg was serving as an officer, actively fighting in the Prussian cavalry on the incredibly dangerous Russian front.
And Einstein actually intervened, right?
He did. The scientific community was so terrified of losing him that Einstein literally wrote him a personal, urgent letter begging him to lead the trenches.
Wow.
Einstein argued that Warburg's brain was simply too valuable to the future of global science to risk getting shot by a random bullet.
That is the unparalleled level of genius we are discussing here.
And Einstein's assessment was entirely correct. Warburg survives the war, returns to his laboratory, and spends the next 5 decades doing meticulous, incredibly groundbreaking work on the deep mechanics of cellular respiration.
He wanted to know how cells breathe.
Exactly. How do they convert fuel into usable energy? And in the 1920s, Warburg makes an observation that defines his legacy and fundamentally changes biology forever.
So we are going to dive into the biochemistry here for a minute because this specific mechanism is the absolute crux of this entire investigation.
Okay, let's break it down. How do normal, healthy human cells generate their energy?
Normal, healthy cells generate their energy through a highly efficient, elegant process called oxidative phosphorylation.
Okay, oxidative phosphorylation.
Right. Essentially, inside the cell's mitochondria, which, function as the microscopic powerhouses of the cell, they take glucose, which is simple sugar, and they burn it in the presence of oxygen.
That makes sense.
It is a very clean, very efficient way to extract the maximum amount of ATP, or cellular energy, from a single molecule of fuel.
So that is the baseline for healthy tissue. But what exactly did Warburg notice when he looked closely at the metabolism of cancer cells?
He observed that tumor cells behave very strangely, almost paradoxically.
How so?
Instead of utilizing that highly efficient oxygen-burning method, cancer cells consistently prefer a much older, incredibly inefficient metabolic pathway called aerobic glycolysis, or essentially fermentation.
They ferment the glucose.
Yes,
Ugh.
they ferment it into lactate. Now, normal cells typically only resort to fermentation when they are desperately starving for oxygen.
Like your leg muscles burning during a really intense sprint.
Exactly. But Warburg noticed that cancer cells heavily, stubbornly rely on fermentation even when oxygen is abundantly available in their environment.
Wait, so they are literally surrounded by breathable oxygen, but they actively choose not to use it?
Yes, they actively avoid burning fuel efficiently.
What's absolutely fascinating here is that this specific observation, which the scientific community officially named the Warburg effect, is absolutely 100% true.
It is entirely real.
It is so universally reliable across various types of cancer that it is the literal functional foundation of modern PET scans used in oncology hospitals everywhere today.
It's amazing when you think about it. When a cancer patient goes into a hospital for a PET scan to see if their cancer has spread, they are injected with a harmless, slightly radioactive form of glucose.
Sugar, basically.
Right. And because cancer cells rely on this incredibly inefficient fermentation process that Warburg discovered, they have to consume massive, staggering amounts of sugar just to get enough baseline energy to survive and divide.
They are incredibly sugar-hungry engines.
Exactly. So the PET scanner simply acts as a camera, looking for exactly where all that radioactive sugar is pooling and being rapidly consumed in the body, and it lights up those highly active tumors right on the screen.
Warburg's initial observation of this metabolic shift was one of the most monumental, paradigm-shifting contributions to cancer biology ever made.
Absolutely.
He rightfully won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1931 for this exact work.
He deserved it.
So he discovers this brilliant, undeniably real mechanism. He maps the metabolic reality of the tumor. Where does this brilliant legacy go so horribly, tragically wrong?
The tragic misreading happens when Warburg attempts to definitively explain why cancer cells adopt this bizarre metabolic behavior.
The root cause.
Right. Warburg makes a massive, deeply flawed causal assumption. He looks at these cancer cells aggressively fermenting sugar instead of utilizing the available oxygen, and he concludes, oh, their physical ability to use oxygen must be fundamentally broken.
He assumes the mitochondria themselves are irreparably damaged.
Yes. And from there, he makes the ultimate fatal leap of logic. He concludes that this lack of oxygen utilization is not just a secondary symptom of the cancer, but the singular root cause of the cancer itself.
Okay, wait. Let me process this difference between a symptom and a cause, because I want to try an analogy here.
Go for it.
Concluding that a lack of oxygen causes cancer just because cancer cells aren't using oxygen efficiently. That is exactly like looking out your window during a massive storm, seeing a bunch of people walking down the street using umbrellas, and concluding that the presence of the umbrellas is what is causing the rain to fall.
That is a remarkably perfect analogy.
Really?
Yes, he fundamentally confused a cellular coping mechanism, an adaptation, with the root cause of the destructive environment.
Because the cancer cell isn't just a normal, healthy cell that suddenly got choked off from oxygen and turned evil as a result.
No, not at all.
The cancer cell has a severe genetic mutation, the storm in our analogy,
Right.
that makes it want to replicate wildly out of control. And to replicate that fast, it needs massive amounts of building blocks. It needs raw biological materials to create new cell walls and DNA.
Right.
And it turns out the inefficient fermentation process, the umbrella, is actually much better at quickly providing those raw biological materials than the highly efficient oxygen-burning process is.
Exactly. The cell is choosing fermentation entirely on purpose because it serves its chaotic, rapid growth agenda.
So this raises an important question regarding scientific consensus. How did the broader scientific community react to Warburg's causal claim?
Well, by the 1950s, the wider community of geneticists and cellular biologists had completely figured this error out.
They saw the flaw.
Yeah. Other researchers were heavily studying tumor cells and definitively proving that the mitochondria in cancer cells weren't fundamentally broken at all. Under the right specific laboratory conditions, they could force cancer cells to respire oxygen normally.
So the problem wasn't the environmental oxygen supply.
No, the problem was the underlying mutated oncogenes driving the cell's erratic behavior. The scientific consensus correctly moved on. They realized Warburg had found a brilliant effect, not the root cause.
But from everything written about him, Warburg was famously, legendarily stubborn about his legacy.
He was beyond stubborn. He was an imperious, incredibly proud man who simply flatly refused to accept that his grand causal theory was wrong.
Even later in his life.
Even in 1967, near the very end of his long life, he was still aggressively publishing papers and giving lectures, insisting that the prime singular cause of cancer was the replacement of oxygen respiration by fermentation,
Wow.
and that keeping bodily oxygen levels high would absolutely prevent the disease. He dug his heels in and defended the error until the day he died.
And his immense stubbornness handed the burgeoning alternative medicine world the absolute greatest gift they could ever possibly ask for.
Oh, without a doubt.
Think about the impenetrable pseudoscientific syllogism this creates for a modern ozone advocate.
It's so neat and tidy.
It is. They say Dr. Otto Warburg, an undisputed genius and Nobel Prize winner, definitively proved that cancer is caused by a lack of oxygen. Cancer cells hate oxygen. Ozone therapy is literally supercharged oxygen delivered straight into your bloodstream. Therefore, ozone therapy kills cancer.
It is incredibly clean.
It makes so much intuitive sense if you haven't spent a decade studying oncogene signaling or complex metabolic pathways.
It is the ultimate logical trap. And once that intellectual trap was set by Warburg's theory, the movement needed a physical, clinical infrastructure to make it look like a real, formalized, respectable medical practice.
Which brings us to how this flawed theory finally merged with that practical World War I experience we talked about. Specifically in post-war Germany. You have the German doctors who remembered ozone from the trenches, and now they have their very own German Nobel laureate providing the theoretical justification.
Exactly. In the post-war decades, particularly in Germany, certain physicians begin to aggressively experiment with systemic applications of ozone.
Like who?
You have prominent figures like Albert Wolff, who starts publicly claiming to use ozone gas to treat colon and cervical cancer as early as 1915.
But the real structural institutionalization happens later.
Yes. It happens a bit later with a highly influential physician named Hans Wolff.
Ah, Hans Wolff. He's the figure who really formalizes the specific intravenous procedure we described in our opening hook today.
He is. By the late 1950s, Hans Wolff teams up with a brilliant mechanical engineer named Joachim Hensler.
What did his work do?
Hensler successfully develops a highly precise, medically calibrated, reliable ozone generator.
Oh, so not Tesla's old sparking box.
No, this wasn't Nikola Tesla's crude, unpredictable machine from 1896. This was a piece of modern, sleek, clinical hardware that could deliver exact concentrations of the gas.
Okay, that changes the aesthetic completely.
Completely. Together, Wolff and Hensler formalized the specific technique of major autohemotherapy. That's the drawing of the venous blood, precisely ozonating it in a sterile, sealed environment, and immediately reinfusing it.
They standardized it.
Yeah, in 1961, Wolff publishes standardized, highly detailed clinical protocols. And by 1972, they officially found the German Ozone Therapy Association.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me from a historical perspective. Why Germany?
The great question.
Like, why did this entire massive clinical infrastructure take root so deeply and permanently in the German medical landscape, while the mainstream medical establishments in the U.S. and Britain were largely abandoning it?
It fundamentally comes down to deeply ingrained regulatory and cultural history.
How so?
Germany has a very long, very deep, legally protected tradition of integrating naturopathy and complementary medicine into their broader mainstream healthcare system.
Things like herbalism, homeopathy.
Exactly, all those natural cures. They even have a specific legal classification for these practitioners called Heilpraktiker.
Oh, interesting.
Their medical culture has historically been vastly more tolerant of these alternative therapies. They demand significantly less immediate, rigorously controlled, double-blind clinical evidence up front before allowing a practitioner to offer a treatment to the public.
So it's a completely different foundational philosophy of medical regulation.
Entirely different.
Because in the Anglophone world, regulatory bodies like the FDA usually mandate a strict barrier. They say, prove to us beyond a shadow of a doubt that it works and prove that it is completely safe through massive trials, and then you can legally sell it.
Right, safety and efficacy first.
But in the German complementary tradition, there seems to be much more leeway for the idea that, well, if the proposed mechanism makes theoretical sense and practicing doctors are reporting anecdotal success with their patients, we will allow it to be practiced in clinics and studied simultaneously.
Precisely. And I want to be entirely clear here. We are not making an endorsement or a condemnation of either regulatory system today.
No, just an objective observation.
Right, an observation of why ozone therapy found such a uniquely fertile, protected environment in Germany. Because of this legal and cultural tolerance, ozone therapy was able to slowly build an entire massive institutional architecture over several decades.
They had official medical associations.
They held lavish international conferences.
They published their own dedicated peer-reviewed journals.
Their influence even spread internationally. Cuba actually established an entire national ozone research center funded by the state in 1990.
Wow.
They formed the International Ozone Association.
They basically successfully built a completely parallel medical universe.
They did.
And if you are a terrified patient looking from the outside, desperately searching the internet for options, this doesn't look like a lone grifter selling snake oil from a covered wagon.
Not at all. It looks legitimate.
It looks like a mature, heavily researched, internationally respected medical field. They have the sleep clinical machines, the formalized dosage protocols, the Nobel laureate's foundational theory, and the impressive-sounding professional societies.
But the tragic reality remains that all of that incredibly impressive institutional infrastructure was built entirely on top of Warburg's original tragic misreading of cellular metabolism.
Because the rigorous, controlled clinical evidence for autohemotherapy actually curing or halting cancer in living human beings remained almost entirely non-existent.
It just wasn't there. Yet, despite the lack of evidence, the practice flourished globally anyway.
So we have thoroughly traced the history here. We see the highly flawed theory, and we see exactly how the physical clinics were built and legitimized. But I want to shift our focus entirely to the patient experience now.
Okay, let's look at the patients.
Because even today, in 2026, you can go online, open any social media platform, and find thousands of deeply sincere patients who absolutely swear by this.
You really can.
People who will look right into a camera and say, "Ozone," unequivocally save their lives. Why is the logic so incredibly deeply persuasive to the actual human being sitting in the chair?
Because the narrative the alternative practitioners use is expertly woven with profound, indisputable grains of actual scientific truth.
The best lies have a little truth.
Exactly. A skilled alternative practitioner isn't just making wild, absurd claims out of thin air like those Liposone ads from 1905. They're utilizing very real, incredibly complex, modern biological concepts to build a completely false bridge.
Give me a specific example of that. How do they weaponize a grain of truth in a modern consultation?
Let's look at the concept of tumor hypoxia.
Okay, tumor hypoxia.
It is a verified biological fact that as solid tumors grow rapidly inside the body, their sheer mass often outpaces their own localized blood supply.
They grow too fast for their own good.
Right. Because the surrounding blood vessels literally cannot grow fast enough to keep up with the chaotic cellular replication, areas deep inside the core of the tumor become highly hypoxic.
Meaning they are severely starved of oxygen.
Yes, absolutely. And modern mainstream oncologists know exactly how dangerous these hypoxic zones are.
They are bad news.
Tumors with high levels of internal hypoxia tend to be vastly more aggressive. They are notoriously much harder to treat with traditional radiation therapy, and they almost always carry a significantly worse prognosis for the patient.
So this is a very real, heavily researched, actively studied area of modern cancer biology.
Very real. So the alternative practitioner sits down in a quiet room with the terrified patient and says, "Your recent PT scan shows a highly aggressive tumor. Mainstream science tells us these exact tumors thrive in low oxygen hypoxic environments."
Which is true.
Right. Then they say, Dr. Otto Warburg won a Nobel Prize proving this metabolic reality. We are going to use major autohemotherapy to directly introduce massive high levels of pure oxygen into your bloodstream to systematically attack and dismantle these hypoxic zones.
Wow. I have to admit, if I don't have a PhD in oncology or biochemistry, that explanation sounds absolutely bulletproof.
It really does.
It sounds like the bleeding edge of science.
It sounds incredibly flawlessly logical, but the fundamental causal arrow is completely backward.
Because the tumor isn't highly aggressive, because your overall body is generally lacking in systemic oxygen.
Exactly. The tumor is growing so aggressively fast, entirely due to internal genetic mutations, that it is literally choking itself off from the local blood supply.
Systemically flooding the patient's arm vein with oxygenated bright red blood does absolutely nothing to fix the underlying genetic mutation driving the growth.
Nothing at all. Furthermore, rigorous pharmacological studies show that this transiently oxygenated blood doesn't even reliably penetrate those dense, poorly vascularized hypoxic zones deep inside the solid tumor anyway.
So it doesn't even reach the target.
No.
But they are strategically using incredibly real, terrifying words, hypoxia, Warburg, PD scans, aggressive margins, to weave a compelling narrative that leads the patient to a scientifically false conclusion.
It's masterful manipulation.
But there is another, perhaps even more powerful layer to this, right? It's not just the intellectual logic of the consultation. It's the profound power of the ritual itself.
The physical, tactile experience of the therapy.
Let's go back to that vivid visual from our introduction. The blood in the sterile bag. When the practitioner says they are actively oxygenating your blood, they aren't technically lying to you.
No, physically that is happening.
The ozone gas really does chemically react with the serum. The venous blood really does turn a vibrant, bright, healthy-looking red. You can watch it happen with your own eyes.
Right.
And when that activated blood goes back into your body, you really might feel a massive, sudden rush of energy.
That physiological response is entirely real.
Why do they feel it?
The localized oxidative stress in the blood can trigger the release of various cytokines and stimulate a temporary immune response that feels incredibly invigorating.
Like a jolt to the system.
Yeah. But feeling temporarily subjectively energized is absolutely not the same biological thing as systemic tumor regression.
Right. But imagine you are that desperately ill patient. I want to really truly empathize with this person's exact state of mind for a second.
It's important to do that.
Think about what a conventional modern chemotherapy ward actually feels like.
It's awful.
It is often freezing cold. It is starkly clinical. The attending doctors are incredibly rushed and overworked. And the chemical treatment itself makes you feel like you're actively dying.
You lose your hair. You are violently nauseous.
You feel entirely, terrifyingly out of control of your own body. And your oncologist might be looking at your charts and honestly telling you, we really don't know if this protocol is going to work.
Which is honest, but terrifying.
It is a brutal, isolating, deeply impersonal reality.
It is deeply, profoundly traumatizing on a psychological level.
Now, heavily contrast that trauma to the experience of walking into an upscale ozone clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, or a wellness center down in Florida.
It's night and day.
You walk in, the physical environment is warm, inviting, welcoming. The practitioner actually sits down with you for a full hour.
The power of their time.
They look you in the eye. They listen to your entire complex medical story without looking at their watch. They offer you a comprehensive theory of your disease that makes intuitive sense.
It gives you a roadmap.
And then they perform a deliberate procedure where you actively, physically watch your dark, sick-looking blood turn bright, clean, and healthy before it goes safely back into you.
The sheer psychological relief of that entire experience.
That's immense, isn't it?
The overwhelming feeling of personal agency, of doing something proactive and measurable, of being truly seen and cared for as a human being, it is immense.
A placebo effect generated by that level of care must be incredibly powerful.
It is. And we should absolutely not discount or minimize the genuine healing power of feeling deeply cared for and finally having agency over your own body.
Empathy is a real comfort.
But we have to be ruthlessly, uncompromisingly clear here. Psychological relief does not shrink mutated, aggressive cellular masses.
Deep empathy, as beautiful as it is, does not repair broken, mutating DNA.
No, it doesn't.
And that profound disconnect between psychological relief and physical reality is exactly where the state eventually feels compelled to step in. Because when vulnerable people are paying tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket for psychological relief that is explicitly marketed as a definitive cancer cure, people inevitably get hurt.
Which brings us to the complex, ongoing regulatory perimeter.
What has the FDA actually done about this?
The United States Food and Drug Administration has actually been remarkably clear and consistent on this specific issue for decades.
When did they first step in?
Well, in 1976, and again in a major reaffirmation in 2006, the FDA explicitly legally declared ozone to be a toxic gas with absolutely no known, proven, useful medical application in specific adjunctive therapy.
So they completely shut down the medical claims.
Yes, ozone therapy devices are officially classified as unapproved medical devices. Actively marketing them to treat severe conditions like cancer is a direct violation of federal law.
And the FDA didn't just write stern memos and leave it at that, did they?
Oh, no. They physically kicked down doors.
Oh.
Beginning in the early 1990s, they started executing armed raids on domestic clinics. They actively prosecuted and imprisoned manufacturers who were aggressively selling these generators across state lines.
Just seizing the equipment.
In 2010, armed agents seized dozens of expensive machines from clinics in California. And in 2015, the absolute highest stakes of this unregulated market became tragically, publicly clear.
What happened in 2015?
Two homeopathic practitioners operating in Las Vegas allegedly injected an improperly ozonized solution directly into a patient's bloodstream, and the patient died as a direct result.
Oh, my God.
Those practitioners were officially charged by the state with second-degree murder.
Second-degree murder. That is incredibly serious. But aggressively cracking down on an industry domestically rarely stops a truly desperate, highly lucrative market. It just displaces it, right?
Exactly. This relentless FDA pressure created a massive migration effect. The entire therapy simply moved to the border.
It pushed it outward.
It moved into massive, heavily advertised clinics in Tijuana, Mexico, located right across the border from San Diego. They cater almost exclusively to wealthy, desperate American patients.
And the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, it moved to luxury resorts in the Caribbean. And it moved into these incredibly careful, gray area integrative clinics operating within the U.S. that are expertly advised by lawyers.
Advised on what to say.
On the exact specific language they must use in their marketing to successfully avoid triggering an FDA raid. They sell wellness and cellular support. They carefully never use the word cure.
Let's talk deeply about the true cost of this entire industry. Obviously, injecting an unstable, toxic gas directly into the human circulatory system carries inherent direct risks. You mentioned the fatal case in Las Vegas.
Yes, direct physical harm.
Even the early German clinical research from the 1970s and 80s documented severe adverse events, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like pulmonary embolisms, heart attacks, and occasional deaths.
The direct immediate complication rate is statistically quite low when the procedure is performed by highly trained individuals using incredibly modern, precise machines.
But the risk is definitively not zero.
Far from zero. Whenever you are actively reinfusing blood and a gas back into the body, the terrifying risk of an embolism, a microscopic gas bubble accidentally blocking a major vital blood vessel in the heart or brain, is always a present danger.
But the direct physical harm of the needle and the gas isn't even the biggest danger to the patient, is it?
No, it's not. The most significant, highly measurable, and devastating harm, the thing that keeps mainstream oncologists awake at night with frustration, is the immense opportunity cost.
The cost of time.
Time. Cancer is fundamentally a biological ticking clock.
Every day counts.
Exactly. There is very often a highly specific narrow window of time where a solid tumor is localized enough that surgical intervention or targeted modern chemotherapy can actually be definitively curative.
You can catch it and eliminate it.
But if a desperate patient decides to spend 6 critical weeks in a clinic in Mexico receiving daily major autohemotherapy instead of undergoing a firmly scheduled, potentially life-saving surgery,
They lose that window.
they might feel wonderful during those 6 weeks. They might feel profoundly empowered and energized. But under the surface, that tumor is continuing to grow, continuing to mutate, and potentially metastasizing to the lymph nodes or the liver.
It's spreading quietly.
Yes. By the time they finally realize the ozone treatments haven't actually halted the disease, that incredibly critical window for curative conventional treatment has completely closed.
The opportunity cost they paid was their life.
Exactly.
So, after an entire century of history, what does this all mean for the core science itself? Is there absolutely zero baseline evidence that ozone does anything to cancer cells? I mean, we talked extensively about how well it kills bacteria on contact. Does it kill
Well,
cancer?
This is where we have to be rigorously intellectually honest about the exact state of the scientific evidence.
What does the data say?
It is factually inaccurate to say the scientific literature is entirely 100% empty.
Okay, so there's something.
If you take a sterile petri dish in a laboratory, fill it with a cultivated line of human cancer cells, and directly introduce highly precise concentrations of ozone gas. Yes, laboratory studies have repeatedly shown that it can successfully induce apoptosis.
Apoptosis being the biological term for programmed cell death.
Right. It absolutely can and does kill cancer cells in a dish.
Right.
But as the old cynical medical joke goes, a loaded handgun also successfully kills cancer cells in a petri dish.
Right.
Household bleach kills cancer cells in a petri dish. Your everyday hand sanitizer does it instantly.
So killing them outside the body is easy.
The massive biological chasm between dropping a harsh chemical on totally unprotected cells in a flat glass dish and relying on that exact same chemical to safely navigate the wildly complex, constantly moving, dynamic environment of a living human circulatory system.
And to selectively target a hidden tumor without systematically destroying the liver, the kidneys, or the lungs.
That chasm is astronomically large.
It's the ultimate classic failure of translational medicine.
Exactly. Thousands upon thousands of chemical compounds look like absolute miracles in vitro.
But they don't work in visa.
Almost none of them survive the incredibly rigorous, multi-phase clinical trial process required to prove they work safely in living humans. And ozone therapy, despite a century of massive popularity, has never successfully been through that rigorous, large-scale, placebo-controlled trial process to prove it increases cancer survival rates.
Has anyone tried?
The clinical trials that do currently exist in the literature are almost exclusively small, very poorly controlled, and mostly look at whether the therapy improves a patient's subjective, self-reported quality of life during chemo, not whether it is actually shrinking the physical tumor.
So the honest, complete truth isn't we know for an absolute scientific fact that it is completely useless.
No.
The honest truth is we simply don't know if it does anything beneficial at all for cancer survival in humans, because the people making millions of dollars selling it have never done the incredibly hard, expensive work of properly testing it.
Exactly.
And that exact specific type of scientific ambiguity, that lingering gray area, is exactly where false hope breeds, thrives, and becomes incredibly profitable.
They exploit that gray area perfectly.
The advocates can just point to the dead cancer cells in the petri dish and say, look, science, it works, while entirely avoiding the brutal necessary work of proving it works safely in the human body.
That is the ultimate repeating pattern. It is the complete anatomy of a century-long medical detour.
Let's summarize that exact pattern as we wrap up, because it really is the intellectual core of this entire investigation.
It always follows the same steps.
You always start with a genuine, undeniable, brilliant scientific observation. Otto Warburg accurately noticing that cancer cells inefficiently ferment sugar.
Real science.
Real science. Then you immediately apply a wild, massive overinterpretation. Warburg stubbornly deciding that a lack of oxygen must therefore cause the cancer.
The fatal flaw.
Then, the next generation builds a clinical mechanism that intelligently borrows real scientific concepts. PET scans, tumor hypoxia, ozone's proven oxidizing power to make the entire package sound highly legitimate.
They dress it up nicely.
Then, when the FDA or the mainstream medical establishment inevitably pushes back against the lack of evidence, the advocates expertly frame that pushback not as a reasonable demand for clinical safety data, but as a massive, coordinated global conspiracy to violently suppress a cheap natural cure just to protect pharmaceutical profits.
The conspiracy narrative is so powerful.
And at the very absolute bottom of all of this, funding this entire century-long endeavor is a truly desperate patient, a terrified human being who just wants agency, empathy, and hope when they have been brutally told there is none left.
It is a profound tragedy on multiple intersecting levels, but the most profound historical tragedy of all might ultimately belong to Otto Warburg himself.
His legacy is so complicated.
His genuine, brilliant discovery aerobic glycolysis in tumors fundamentally changed the world. Millions of human lives have been saved or significantly extended because modern PET scans can accurately, reliably map metastatic tumors based entirely on his exact 1920s observation.
That's incredible.
And modern oncology is currently pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into researching highly advanced ways to selectively target that exact metabolic pathway with incredibly new, precise drugs.
If he had just stopped at the brilliant observation, if he hadn't been so impossibly, legendarily stubborn about his deeply flawed causal theory, he would be universally unconditionally revered today as one of the undisputed greatest heroes of modern medicine.
Instead, his intense stubbornness, his absolute refusal to admit to his peers that the mitochondria weren't fundamentally broken, became the foundational intellectual bedrock for an entire century of highly profitable charlatanism.
That's a heavy price to pay for pride.
His respected name and his Nobel Prize have been cynically used to extract hundreds of millions of dollars from highly vulnerable, dying people who are paying for the privilege of watching bags of bubbling blood.
It is the ultimate, tragic, double-edged sword of scientific genius. The metabolic map he originally drew was brilliant, but he aggressively insisted that the map was the territory itself.
And desperate people have been utterly lost in that false territory ever since.
Yeah.
This raises one final, and I think very provocative question for us to consider as we close. We spent this entire investigation rigorously dismantling the science of ozone therapy, showing exactly how the biological mechanism fails and how the underlying theory is fundamentally flawed.
Took it apart.
But we also talked deeply about exactly why patients continue to flock to these clinics.
They go for the time.
Yes, they go for the unhurried, deeply empathetic attention of the practitioner. They go for a renewed sense of personal control and a profound feeling of being deeply personally cared for in a warm, supportive environment.
The immense power of psychological relief.
Exactly. So here's the lingering question. If modern conventional medicine, the massive hospitals with the incredible MRI machines and the proven highly targeted life-saving chemotherapies, if they could somehow figure out how to structurally, fundamentally reorganize themselves,
To be more human.
if they could offer scared patients the exact same amount of uninterrupted time, the exact same deeply personalized empathetic attention, and the exact same profound sense of personal agency that these alternative Mexican ozone clinics effortlessly provide, how much of the multi-billion-dollar alternative medicine industry would simply quietly evaporate overnight?
That is absolutely something to think about. Until next time.